It's considered by many to be the marquee race of the midterms, Paxton versus Talarico. But if you think that's all there is to it, think again. That story today on The Standard.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm David Brown. Shades of Ross Perot, why a third-party candidate could upset the calculus in this year's big Senate race in Texas. And they're back for the first time in 60 years. A new world screwworm's been detected in Texas livestock. An emergency quarantine in part of South Texas will have details. And a last-minute surge puts the Knicks over the Spurs in Game 1 of the NBA Finals. Today, 20 things New York can't win over San Antonio. Those stories, a top 10 moment in Texas music, and a whole lot more coming up today on the Texas Standard. No matter where you are, it's Texas Standard Time on this 4th day of June 2026. I'm David Brown. Great to have you with us on this Thursday. Now, if you're a regular listener, little doubt you know about this November's marquee contest in the midterms, right? Need I spell it out for you? Texas's U.S. Senate race between State Attorney General Ken Paxton, the Republican candidate, and Austin State Representative James Talarico, his Democratic opponent. Now, polls suggest this could be a close race. If so, that proximity, that closeness may matter more than most of us realize, in part because the story's not just about Paxton and Talarico, not the whole story. There's a third candidate on the ballot who could end up playing an outsized role in shaping the outcome. Here to tell us more about it, Andrew Schneider. He covers state politics for our partner station, Houston Public Media. Andrew, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
All right, tell us about this third candidate. Who is Ted Brown?
Ted Brown is the Libertarian candidate. He is a retired insurance adjuster and in his day job, but he's also the vice chair of the Libertarian Party of Travis County. He's also the former chair of the Libertarian Party of California. He previously ran as the Libertarian candidate for Senate in 2024. That was against Republican incumbent Ted Cruz and then Democratic Congressman Colin Allred. And he garnered what was a record for a Libertarian candidate running for Senate in Texas, just over 250,000 votes.
You know, I know what a lot of listeners are saying right now. They're listening to us talk about this Libertarian Party candidate. And they're saying, you know, even in Texas, a Libertarian doesn't have a real chance of winning a U.S. Senate contest. But that's not the point, it seems to me, because if you can draw in, 250,000 voters? If this race is close, well, lay it out for us. What sort of impact could he have in this upcoming election cycle?
If he were to pull as little as 2% of the vote and the contest came down to a near tie between Ken Paxton and James Talarico, it could wind up tipping the balance. And most polls suggest that voters for the Libertarian candidate, particularly in this race, would likely come at the expense of Ken Paxton. I spoke with Ted Brown in advance of a spot that I did on this earlier in the week, and I asked him point blank, you know, a lot of people look at the role that third-party candidates play, and they say, you know, the best you can do is to play a spoiler in the contest. And how do you respond to that? And he said, well, you can't call somebody a spoiler when the system itself is rotten and putrid. Those were his exact words.
I take his point about the spoiler candidate. He doesn't want to be seen as just a spoiler candidate. He wants his platform to be deeply and seriously considered clearly. But I can only imagine what's happening in Republican circles right now if this is going to be a close race. What are you hearing from Republican politicos about the possibility that having a Libertarian candidate out there could end up siphoning off votes that might otherwise go to Ken Paxton?
The one Republican political figure that I heard comment on this was Senator Cornyn himself. He actually picked up the story that we ran and reposted it on his X.com feed.
Wait a minute. We're talking about John Cornyn, the longtime U.S. Senator.
We are talking about incumbent Senator John Cornyn. He picked it up. He was subsequently called out by a third party website, claiming that he was actually endorsing or promoting Ted Brown as an alternative to Ken Paxton. He immediately clarified. He said, "No, I am not promoting him. I'm just pointing out that he could potentially draw conservative voters away from Ken Paxton."
So maybe Republicans are talking about this. We're just not hearing about it because they don't want this story to become a part of the news cycle.
Exactly. I mean, there is a lot of talk, both before and immediately after the primary runoff last week about the need to close ranks behind the eventual nominee. One thing we haven't heard, though, from Senator Cornyn is whether he would come out and endorse Ken Paxton or whether he would campaign for Ken Paxton. He's repeatedly said, "Look, I support the Republican ticket. I always have," but he would not, and still has not gone as far as to say, "I endorse Ken Paxton. We need to vote for Ken Paxton." And even if he were to do so, it's an open question as to how many of his supporters would follow him to support Ken Paxton. A lot of polling suggests that the bulk of Republican voters would wind up voting for him over Talarico, but there are some who polling suggests would stay home, and others who could potentially vote for Ted Brown.
Is anyone on the Democratic side talking about the prospects that Ted Brown might end up tilting the balance?
I haven't heard anyone specifically come out on the Democratic side saying it, but I have to expect that they're looking at this with the prospect of this helping them. That's really the only way that this situation could be read. I mean, Brown himself said that, look, he's hoping to draw supporters from across the political spectrum, people who don't see either of the main party candidates as potentially providing them with an acceptable option. But he clearly seems to be tilting he clearly seems to be expecting more of his support to be coming from disaffected conservatives.
Yeah, if anyone remembers the name Ross Perot, this whole scenario may sound somewhat familiar. We've been talking with Andrew Schneider, who covers state politics for our partners at Houston Public Media. We'll link to his reporting, texasstandard.org. Andrew, thanks so much.
Thank you.
The U.S. Department of Agriculture shared some news yesterday that ranchers have been dreading. A case of New World screwworm was confirmed in a 3-week-old calf in South Texas. Screwworm larvae are parasitic. They burrow down into the open wounds of warm-blooded animals. They used to be a huge problem for cattle ranchers back in the day, but this is the first confirmed case in Texas since Nancy Sinatra hit the charts with These Boots Are Made for Walking, and a science fiction show hit the TV airwaves called Star Trek. Ever heard of it? Alas, we're not talking science fiction today. What does it mean that for the first time since 1966, the screwworm's back on Texas soil? For more on that, we're joined by the Texas Standard's Michael Marks, who's been tracking this story closely. Hey there, Michael.
Hey, David.
So what do we know about the circumstances of this confirmed New World screwworm case?
According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, this screwworm was found in the umbilical cord of a 3-week-old calf on a ranch in La Pryor, Texas. This is located about 20 miles south of Uvalde, so a little inland, not right on the border. There'd been reports of screwworm cases closer and closer to Texas before this news broke, but Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins, who is a Texan, says this case looks like an incident more than an infestation.
We all work together and follow the animal treatment protocols and movement restriction guidance. There is no reason to believe that this incursion will result in an establishment of the pest in our country.
Still, this is something that her department has been getting ready for some time, David. The federal government spent hundreds of millions over the past year to build out infrastructure and new technology to prevent the screwworm from reaching the U.S. and then address it once it does get here.
Let's step back for just a minute, though. Why is this such a big deal for folks who, say, aren't near any ranches? Why are ranchers so concerned about the return of this bug?
Well, the screwworm poses a major threat to the health of animals as well as the Texas economy. What happens is when an animal gets infested with these, they create these gnarly infections that are tough to clean out, very gross to deal with, and potentially fatal. If you raise cattle, sheep, goats, white-tailed deer, and you've got screwworms in the vicinity, you've got to spend a lot of time physically monitoring your animals, potentially doctoring wounds. So it's a big drain on resources. They were pushed out of the U.S. by the 1970s, but I've talked to a lot of folks who were working with animals back when they were a problem.
Yeah.
Chuck Schmidt, he raises cattle near Fredericksburg. This is a cut of him, remembering what it was like to help treat animals with his dad back in the early 60s.
Oh, it's nasty. It stinks. It's gross. You've got to trim everything back. We had some kind of goop that we put on it, and if it was already inside, there was probably a good chance that animal wasn't going to survive.
So this could throw a real wrench into the rural economy. It's already done so for some folks. Cattle raisers in northern Mexico, David, haven't been able to sell their animals to American feedlots for months because of containment efforts for the screwworm. So this could be a multi-billion-dollar problem when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I remember hearing that clip from the official who believed that this was not an infestation. This was a one-off, and yet you've been tracking this story for some time. What does the federal government have by way of a plan to make sure that this confirmed case doesn't become a full-scale outbreak?
Well, the new measures they're taking include flooding the area around La Pryor with sterile screwworms. This is how they were eradicated in the past. Female screwworms only mate once. So if you drop a bunch of sterilized screwworms in the area, the females will do their thing but produce no offspring. This is how they push them out of the U.S. in the first place. So we're talking about dropping millions and millions of sterilized flies in this area, David. But there's also, for the time being, a quarantine zone of about 20 kilometers around the site where the screwworm was found. And that's not just for cattle. This is Bud Dingus. He's the Texas state veterinarian and executive director of the Texas Animal Health Commission.
Within this zone, I've issued an executive order that places a quarantine on all warm-blooded animals. It is very important that all animal owners understand the importance of not moving their animals out of this zone at this time.
So that's dogs, cats, birds, whatever. For the time being, if you're in this zone around the Pryor, you need regulatory sign-off to move your animal out of the area. USDA has also sent a team of experts to help support local health authorities. They're trying to keep an eye on local wildlife to see if they show any signs of infection.
We're going to have more information about screwworms and the spread over at texasstandard.org. We've been talking about them with our own Michael Marks. Michael, thanks so much for the update.
Thanks, David.
And there's a whole lot more of the Texas Standard just ahead. Don't touch that dial.
Support for Texas Standard comes from UT San Antonio, a Carnegie Tier 1 public research institution, and designated as Texas's National Institute on Aging Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. More at utsa.edu. Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas CASA. For a child in foster care, small moments today can have a big impact tomorrow. More on how lending time and support can help make a difference at becomeacasa.org.
I'm Matt Riley from KUTX, and as we look towards the 250th birthday of the United States, we're celebrating with the Texas 250, the Lone Star State's contribution to American music. Here's a moment when Texas music had the world's attention. September 28, 1991, Tushino Airfield in Moscow. The Monsters of Rock Festival is a free concert that drew a huge crowd, with estimates of up to 1.6 million fans in attendance. Despite being an opening act for AC/DC and Metallica, Dallas metal outfit Pantera delivered a ferocious career-defining set. Held during the chaotic final days of the Soviet Union and just weeks after the failed August coup, the festival was essentially a celebration of newfound freedom. Fans, starved of Western heavy metal for decades, flooded the airfield. The crowd was so massive that Soviet military forces were deployed to hold back the ocean of people.
This is called domination!
Having primarily played in small bars and clubs in Texas, the band was suddenly thrown onto a gigantic stage in front of a massive crowd. Despite the nerves, the band played a blistering high-energy set that stole the show. The show featured classics from their Cowboys from Hell album, including a crushing rendition of Domination that is widely considered one of the heaviest moments in metal history. The Soviet Union would officially fall just 3 months later. Draw what you will from that. You can see more about this moment at texasstandard.org/Texas250. And we want to hear from you. We're counting down the 250 essential Texas songs July 3rd and 4th on KUTX, and you can cast your vote for your favorite Texas song at texasstandard.org/Texas250.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard. One of the world's largest defense contractors is ramping up production as the war with Iran drives demand for aircraft, missiles, and military hardware. In late May alone, Lockheed Martin, which has an aeronautics division based in Fort Worth, won more than $1 billion in new defense contracts, including nearly $900 million tied to F-35 fighter jets assembled in North Texas. The company is also expanding munitions production and adding capacity across its supply chain. Joining us now, Eric Garcia. He's been covering this story for the Fort Worth Report. Eric, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Thanks for having me.
Fort Worth, for those who don't know, it's home to the F-35 assembly line, and the F-35 is used by many nations, not just the United States. And what role does North Texas play in the broader defense supply chain? How much of the work is actually happening in North Texas?
Well, the F-35 is assembled in Fort Worth. A lot of the parts come from other suppliers, so that each one of them might make a little part, and all those parts are assembled into the actual aircraft.
But this is such a big deal. This is such a big ramp up that I gather, according to your story, something like 150 suppliers gathered in Dallas to talk about what it's going to take to streamline the process. What do you know about that meeting, and say more about why that matters?
That's correct. A few weeks ago in Dallas, Lockheed Martin held a munitions supply conference with military officials and suppliers. The company is planning to use that to quadruple production capacity for basically a defensive missile system.
Well, there's an expected completion date, as I understand it, for this contract taken as a whole, something like 2030. I'm wondering if there's anything that can be deduced from the duration or scale of this contract work.
Well, the F-35 does take some time to assemble. Some of these contracts call for parts for the F-35. For instance, there's an order for 1,400,000 units of the brake assembly heat sinks, which control the heating elements related to the jet's brake pads. Mm-hmm. So a lot of that work is going to be done in South Bend, Indiana, but that is expected to be done by 2030.
I think when most Texans hear about billion-dollar defense contracts, they naturally think about national security, but it's important to underscore that there's an economic story here. What does this mean for workers and communities connected to the defense industry in Texas? I'm wondering if there's any talk about perhaps Lockheed Martin adding additional workers at the mothership, and if so, I wonder how many numbers there might be.
They haven't talked about adding any employees yet. Basically, Lockheed Martin contributes to the economy $79 billion each year.
Wow.
That supplies over 317,000 jobs. And many of those are indirect jobs and suppliers, but it does have a huge economic impact on not just Texas, but across the nation.
Eric, what do you think the bigger implications are for North Texas with the awarding of this contract? And, I wonder what this says about the defense industry writ large when we pull back and think about how much we rely on these defense contracts, it sounds like.
Well, as I said, a huge economic impact for local communities, including Fort Worth. Fort Worth has roughly about 70,000 workers that work on the F-35. They have a ginormous plant over in West Fort Worth at the Joint Naval Air Base there.
Talking about building new facilities as well, or no?
They're looking at increasing capacity, but not necessarily building new facilities at this time.
Yeah. What does this say about the way that mission planners are thinking about future conflicts? I know that there's been a real turn toward the use of drones and not so much piloted planes, and yet we're seeing this big order.
Drones are being advanced through military contracts. They're still in development under many defense suppliers. But, certainly it could increase the longevity of the war if drones are being used. Some people have touted drones as being more effective in the fact that you don't have a manpower involved. If a drone crashes, you don't have to worry about a pilot or any crew that's involved. So there are some benefits to the use of drones.
Does this suggest, with the duration of this contract, that the Trump administration is foreseeing a more protracted war, or can that be presumed?
It certainly seems like things are fluid at this point. We're hearing different things every day, but under Trump's order to increase munitions, that certainly shows that perhaps he's thinking about military action, continuing in Iran, or as we've seen in other nations, they've had military strikes there too.
Eric Garcia's got a very interesting breakdown over at Fort Worth Report. We'll link to his reporting, texasstandard.org. Eric, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, a workers' compensation provider that's been caring for hardworking Texans for over 30 years. More at texasmutual.com/expert partner. Support for Texas Standard comes from Good Spread, an Austin-based mineral sunscreen brand seeking to make clean, reef-safe SPF for every body under the sun. Now at H-E-B stores across Texas. More at goodspreadsuncare.com.
From the Texas Newsroom, I'm Matt Harab. ERCOT, which oversees the Texas power grid, says the state could see record energy demand this summer. Our Natalie Weber tells us growth in renewable energy could help the state meet that demand and avoid blackouts.
After a historic freeze led to massive power outages across the state in 2021, many Texans began to worry about the grid's reliability, not just in the winter, but also during hot summers. However, University of Houston energy fellow Ed Hers says the grid is now in a much better place. Even though Texas is facing record demand this year, he says the state has enough solar and battery power to sustain the grid.
Without wind, solar, and batteries on the Texas grid today, the state's economy would be dead in the water.
ERCOT says warmer temperatures and large energy consumers, like cryptocurrency miners, have increased the demand on the power grid. I'm Natalie Weber in Houston.
Houston area public safety officials say they're fully staffed and prepared to handle the 2026 FIFA World Cup. Houston's police chief even said they were over-prepared, and that includes the use of law enforcement drone surveillance. But officials repeatedly declined to clarify how the drones would be used. Here's Larry Satterwhite from the city's Public Safety and Homeland Security Office.
We are definitely leaning into everything, trying to ensure a safe event. The world's changing, and we have to change with it.
The World Cup begins next week. Texas will host 16 World Cup matches in both Houston and Arlington. Excavators have a long history of damaging natural gas pipelines in Texas, and that frequently leads to explosive gas leaks. KERA analyzed data from the Texas Railroad Commission after last week's Oak Cliff explosion left 3 dead. More than 4,800 pipeline strikes have been reported so far this year. Pipeline expert Salvatore Salamone says excavation is one of the main reasons why.
It's a really complex problem because especially gas sometimes cannot be detected, especially small leakage. caused like from corrosion or mechanical damage.
State law requires that excavators contact Texas 811 before digging so underground utilities can be marked. And the San Antonio Spurs fell short of a victory in Game 1 of the NBA Finals yesterday against the New York Knicks. 105-95 was the final in that one. Victor Wembanyama, the star for the Spurs, says San Antonio did not play their best basketball. The Spurs will get a chance, though, to even the series tomorrow night. Game 2 tips off at 7:30 at the Frostbank Center. I'm Matt Harrop in the Texas Newsroom.
Support for these Texas headlines comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, committed to strengthening the state's workforce and its communities through safety and wellness grants and education initiatives. More at texasmutual.com/community impact.
33 minutes past the hour, Texas Standard Time. I'm David Brown. As the number and scale of data centers across the country continues to grow, including right here in Texas, so has opposition to them. In many communities, concerns about data centers' impact on the electric grid and the local water supply have grown, especially because it isn't always clear where and how large these planned projects will ultimately be. Enter an environmental activist whose name may be familiar, Erin Brockovich. She's coordinating what she calls an interactive hub, a website where individuals can share information about data centers in their areas. Our tech expert Omar Gallaga has been writing about this effort for CNET. Omar, welcome back.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me.
So for our listeners who might not have seen the Julia Roberts film from 25 years or so ago, remind us, Erin Brockovich?
Yeah, she became well known for fighting Pacific Gas and Electric over water contamination issues in Hinckley, California. The movie came out in 2000, so this was before that, when she was a legal clerk, and she became very well known. I mean, Julia Roberts plays you, you're going to get some attention. For sure. She continued to advocate for clean water after that. She wrote a book about it a few years ago, and she has her own consulting firm. But now her latest challenge is getting people informed about data centers.
Well, tell us about this new data center tracking project she set up. What's that all about?
Yeah, it's crowdsourced. She actually put out a call a few months ago for people to just send information about data centers in their area, not just ones that are already active and built, but also projects that are under construction or ones that have been proposed. And, we're coming at this at a moment when there's a lot of blowback against data centers around AI, around water usage, around electricity usage, potential health dangers for people that live near data centers. So this has become kind of a flashpoint across the country. And she just launched this website based on that crowdsourced data that maps where all these projects are and where those concerns are in these communities.
Why do Brockovich and those who are participating in her project think it's so important to map data centers?
Well, not only is it that a lot of data centers are operating kind of under the radar, people don't know that some of these big buildings are doing that sort of work. They don't know that some of these proposals are coming to their communities, although they're getting a lot more attention now as this gets more of a debate. But I think transparency is the biggest issue with this, is the feeling that a lot of these projects are happening without a lot of public input, without a lot of public knowledge, that these deals are being made, that to the tune of billions of dollars. And, not all the communities are involved in those conversations. They're starting to be now that data centers are getting so much attention, but certainly in years past, these definitely flew under the radar and people weren't aware of a lot of what was going on.
So is this map publicly observable? That is to say, if you go to the website, can you see points on a map, plots for each data center?
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It's on the main page. It's showing 33 these are major data centers. So there's 33 operational, 53 under construction, and 3,674 that have been reported by citizens. So
I trust you're talking about nationally and not just in Texas.
Yeah, this is across the U.S. And this is not comprehensive. It's not every single data center that exists. These are just the ones where there are concerns.
Hey, you've got the website in front of you. Can you zoom in on Texas and tell us what you see?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of activity around, the central part of the state, Texas, Houston, up in the Dallas area. There's a whole kind of row of data centers, but then also El Paso, West Texas, and Panhandle. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of data centers all across the state, and some of these are still in the works, and that they're not all up and running. Some of these are proposals and active, and obviously we've had communities that have already spoken out against data centers. We had San Marcos and other areas where there have been reversals on some of these plans. So I think the goal overall of the website is like just get people informed about what's happening in their communities.
Yeah, I guess you anticipated what I was going to ask. Get people informed, but then what? I mean, what is she involved any further from what you can tell, or is this just an open source kind of effort? Everyone pitching in and doing their own thing, going their own way.
Yeah, we spoke to one of the people who's been working with her, who is one of her co-authors and who runs her Substack website, where there's also a big blog post kind of detailing, why there's problems with data centers, what you should be concerned about. And she told us that a lot of it is that people just feel like they don't have a voice in this, that these data centers are going up, that they're running without a lot of public input. So it kind of gives people a guide of not only knowing what's happening in their area, but giving them a voice in getting more involved in the civic conversation around these.
What's that website address?
It's brockovichdatacenter.com.
I think a lot of listeners may be interested in finding out more, and we're going to have links to it at texasstandard.org. Omar Gallaga follows the tech news for CNET and joins us here on The Standard each week. Omar, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate the update.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. I appreciate it.
Support for Texas Standard comes from the online UT High School, offering a full-time diploma program for remote, asynchronous learners throughout Texas. More at highschool.utexas.edu/tuition-free.
Hey, what's cooking? Make sure to join us as we check in with Texas's top taco journalists to hear about the latest innovation stories and the people behind many a Texan's favorite go-to. It's Mondo Rayo with the Tacos of Texas. Next Thursday on the Texas Standard.
Support for Tacos of Texas comes from HEB.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm Laura Rice. Photographer Raheem Fortune took one of the photos he's best known for in 2020 in Edna, Texas, outside of Victoria. It's titled Praise Dancers, and it shows 3 women in a Baptist church dressed in white dresses with their arms spread wide. This photo documents just one aspect of Black womanhood, and it's one of many photos Fortune has taken across the American South. Indeed, he's spent years documenting community events and gatherings, and he's one of several photographers featured in a new book that celebrates that work. It's called Kinship and Community, Selections from the Texas African American Photography Archive. Raheem, thank you so much for stopping by the Texas Standard studio.
Thank you for having me. Very excited to speak with you.
Tell us more about the backstory of Praise Dancers. We see this one beautiful image, but could you set the scene a little for us?
Yeah, so the photograph Praise Dancers was made in a small town called Edna, Texas. And this photograph, in a way, shows a kind of passing of the traditions here in Texas in a way in which people are working to preserve kind of cultural heritage and underlining the importance of these rituals as a community building tool.
Well, I love that. Can you talk about some of the things that you were documenting in this book?
So for many years, I've gone around Texas and I photographed all of the regional celebrations, everything from the watermelon dumps to the Juneteenth parades to the MLK parade of Dallas, which is actually the second largest in the country. And so there's a wealth of these regional celebrations here in Texas, and I go year after year and kind of become familiar with the people and have a kind of a high rigor and criticality into what photographs I choose to present.
Well, it sounds like Texas has been a really huge part of your work and your influence. And you also grew up in Oklahoma and are part of the Chickasaw Nation. How does that influence your storytelling as well?
Yeah, so I was born here in Austin, and in the 3rd grade, I moved to Oklahoma, which is where my mother's family is from. My mother is a member of the Chickasaw Nation. And so growing up in that rural environment really did give me my early inspiration, but also being, Chickasaw and African American, that was not something that was highly represented out there. So I actually did experience quite a bit of prejudice growing up there. And I think from an early age, I was really made aware that I was different in a way. And so as I got older, that became a sense of pride for me.
You have a piece in the new book called Between a Memory and Me, a photographic essay. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so this essay is my response to the TAP archive. And I had chosen to work in color rather than black and white, my previous book, Hardtack, was all photographs made in black and white, and in a way kind of responding to the visual language of the community photographer, use of the flash and pulling from ideas around the family album and the vernacular photograph. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to change my visual language to underline the modern context in which these photographs are made. So I switched to a handheld camera using color film and photographing back in the same places where I had made these inroads over the previous decade. And so the essay only tracks 1 year of photographs, which for me typically in the way I work is a short period of time.
Yeah.
But because I had already made these connections, I was able to revisit and approach in a kind of fresh manner and respond to the archive. And so I chose to focus on things like, small town churches, HBCU parades and coronations, as well as some of the regional black rodeos that I had been photographing for years. To not be heavy-handed in, overly contextualizing this historic archive with people who maybe aren't inherently connected. I just wanted to be very ethical in the way in which I went about that.
Yeah, I'm thinking about your story about switching to color now, and the pressure that must have felt to just you had a condensed timeline and you were working with color when you really have a lot more experience in black and white. I mean, I'm nervous for you in hindsight, although obviously you pulled it off beautifully. How did that feel? Was it vulnerable for you, or what was that like?
Yes, I mean, I find that color photography is in a way more challenging because there is another narrative tool, which is the color of a passing by t-shirt or vehicle, which isn't becoming an aesthetic tool within black and white where everything is kind of muted and you're getting to the kind of essence of the image. But I kind of find that color photography is in a way more objective in a modern context because post 1990, the kind of primary mode of images that we see are in color. So I find that in the contemporary context, when you make a photograph in black and white, you're inherently making it almost an abstracted image because you're removing the color and kind of placing it within a more historical context. So I find color to be more challenging, but in a very exciting way. There's also an ability to convey mood with color that isn't available in black and white. And so working on this series actually set me into a path of working in color now. And so my, ongoing project that I'm now have undertaken is in color, and it's been an exciting new challenge.
Your work has been featured in publications including Vogue and The Guardian. You've, taken pictures of Solange and Carmelo Anthony and Tyra Banks, and also just these regular people out there living your lives. I guess how do you balance all that? Is it the same type of challenge with those very vastly different assignments, or do you approach them differently?
I would say more or less the same. Often when I take on a assignment of a public figure, I have to have an inherent interest in them. And, me, myself personally, I am quite critical of celebrity and of public figures. And so if someone can kind of, pass the test of not being like a PR nightmare, I will take on the assignment. And so it's been great. I mean, I've gotten to photograph people like the late Jesse Jackson and Angela Davis and, just so many people who I've looked up to, Queen Latifah and Whoopi Goldberg.
Whoopi Goldberg, yeah.
And so often my goal is to, photograph the everyday and kind of quotidian at the level of superstar and vice versa. I made a portrait of the great actress Nia Long, and our references were pulled directly from, people who were photographed on the street. And so I think there is this kind of trade-off. And I am interested in the way in which kind of mass media and pop culture does influence the everyday. And so I think there is always a kind of conversation between the two. And, a lot of my personal photographs are interested in beauty and fashion. And so there's a kind of immediate trade-off between the two practices that keeps it exciting.
I want to ask you, your father, I understand, was born in the 1950s and is a product of the soul era. Can you talk about that influence and how it, I guess, had an effect on your photographic essay?
Yes, absolutely. A lot of what I'm interested within photographs our narrative device. And I also find there's a really massive crossover with music in the way in which mood and story are conveyed. You know, if you think about the blues or you think about, you know, country standards, they're quite simple in their storytelling devices. There's, you don't want to dilute it too much or use too many elements. And so I think of it very similarly with photographs. So I could go on and on about that connection because it's kind of what keeps me excited.
Well, you're a wonderful storyteller, and your images are beautiful. You can see more of them in a new book called Kinship and Community: Selections from the Texas African American Photography Archive. Raheem Fortune, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Monthly, producer of Where the River Took Us, a podcast about the July 4th floods from survivor Aaron Parsley's perspective, through the voices of his family and others, telling the story of grief, healing, and survival. Available on all podcast platforms.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. Well, last night the Knicks took Game 1 of the NBA Finals. No doubt the Spurs will be ready for Game 2 come Friday, but in the meantime, our friends at Texas Public Radio were asking a question about what San Antonio does better than New York City, no matter what. And some of the answers they received, well, let's bring in Texas Public Radio Vice President of News, Dan Katz. Dan, welcome back to the Standard.
Good to be back.
Give us a sense of where this top 20 list, shall we call it, comes from.
So we decided that this would be our friendly contribution to the rivalry. And it started as a list of 10. And having lived in New York City myself and now call San Antonio home, I started yeah, that's right. I started jotting down a few things that San Antonio does exceptionally well. And then I shared it around the Texas Public Radio, and everyone had an opinion. So before long, that listicle of 10 became 20, and it became less my list and more a reflection of what people at TPR appreciate about San Antonio.
All right, so hit us with number 1.
Well, probably the least controversial item on the list, breakfast tacos. Austin has some great breakfast tacos, right? Plenty of Texas cities do.
Yes.
But San Antonio has a pretty strong claim to being the spiritual home of the breakfast taco. Here, they're not just part of the culture, they are the culture.
Yeah, the platonic breakfast taco. And by the way, you can't find a good breakfast taco in New York, so I think you're pretty safe with that one. What about any other food items make the list?
Well, there were Pan Dulce made the list, offering a sweet alternative to New York's beloved bagels. Brisket made the list, too, and one of the things we say in it, we respect pastrami, we just prefer brisket.
Anything else?
I have to admit, at this point, the whole exercise started to feel a little familiar.
This ain't paste pecani sauce. What's the difference? Cookie. Paste pecani sauce is made in San Antonio with fresh vegetables and spices by people who know what pecani sauce is supposed to taste like.
This stuff's made in New York City?
New York City?
Get a rope.
I like that one. It brings back some old memories, Dan. Food's one thing, of course. Some of the items on the list have nothing to do with comestibles. Give us some of those.
That's right. The bigger part is that food is it's a huge part of San Antonio's identity. We have a label, the UNESCO Creative City of Gastronomy designation, that very few cities in the world have. It's also home to the San Antonio Missions, of course, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. We joke that most cities would be happy to have one. We have 5 missions. So honestly, one of the things that stood out to me the most, though, after moving here was that friendliness aspect. People here acknowledge each other. In New York, you make eye contact with a stranger in the subway, and you've already said too much, right?
Yeah, well, there's that. You would know better than I would, I think, when it comes down to that, Dan. But I guess there would have to be a supermarket or two on that list, surely.
Of course. I mean, H-E-B, we call it not just a supermarket, but a way of life. And those of us who explain San Antonio or move here and go back to our home communities find ourselves talking about H-E-B as one of the first things.
And by the way, what does New York have that's anything like Fiesta in San Antonio?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that New York has, really. A lot of great things that they have. You know, there's the Thanksgiving Day parade. There's New Year's Eve celebration in Times Square. And those are great events to attend or to watch on TV. But when you compare it to our fiesta, you know, the 11-day citywide celebration with a purpose, in San Antonio, you get to join. Everybody's invited. You don't just participate.
Some of these things on the list might have less to do with San Antonio per se, and perhaps more to do with Texas writ large. Affordability, I guess, would fall into that category?
That's right. And yeah, there are definitely things on the list that most Texas cities would claim relative affordability, at least compared to New York, though San Antonians will rightly tell you that's getting tougher.
Yeah.
You have parking, square footage. That's the ability to live somewhere where your closet isn't also your kitchen.
That's right. That's right. What about traffic? Did that come up?
Of course it did. In San Antonio, when you're stuck in traffic for an hour, it's a story. In New York, it's a Tuesday.
Yeah, well said. I sort of wonder if those are San Antonio victories or more New York problems. What do you think?
Well, I would say a little bit of both.
A little bit of both, yeah. Something else that strikes me about this list is that a lot of these things really aren't things at all. You mentioned friendliness, and we should dig into that just a bit more, because when you're talking about friendliness, you're not just talking about someone who sparks up a conversation with you in line at the H-E-B. It's like, I don't know, there's a sense of community. And in fact, I get a lot of that just watching the games, the Spurs games on television. Tell me a little bit more about that sense of community and how real that is, or how sort of constructed that is for the outside world.
Yeah, it's the sense that San Antonio hasn't lost touch with itself as it's been growing. And when people suggested items for the list, they kept coming back to the same things, to community, accessibility, friendliness, and even basketball made the list, not just because of the championships, but because of what the Spurs mean to the city. And what surprised me was how often the conversation came back to what makes San Antonio feel like San Antonio.
Yeah. Any of that surprise you, by the way?
No, not at all. It actually felt quite natural.
Well, now, once you publish a list like this, folks are always going to tell you what you missed, and I'm sure this thing has gone somewhat viral. I mean, we've been hearing about it. What are others, folks online, how are they weighing in on this list?
Well, the internet, of course, pointed out that we missed a few things, like wildflowers, tamales, and more than a few people had some suggestions of their own that would have fit right in. But overall, I love the reaction. The list started as a comparison between two cities, and it ended up becoming a conversation on what people appreciate about home.
Just to be fair, New York still wins a few categories, no?
Of course, Broadway's safe, the museums are safe, and the pizza crowd can file an appeal. But this list, it was totally written with love for San Antonio, but also for New York. I grew up in the New York area and spent time living in the city. New York is truly one of the great cities in the world. I love New York, but I just got to San Antonio as fast as I could.
Yes, amen, brother. New York's a wonderful place, no doubt, but San Antonio definitely special. And Dan Katz knows all about that as Vice President of News at Texas Public Radio, a proud San Antonian these days. Dan, thanks so much for sharing the list and your love for San Antonio with us today. We needed it.
Thanks so much for having me, and go Spurs, go.
Go Spurs, go indeed. Hey, picture this. You're walking along a Texas beach one day and you see them. First, a few along the beach line, and then more and more tangles of a thin yellow, red, or white string that look a little like electrical wire. Careful not to touch, they might be alive. The Texas Beachcomber tells us what summer vacationers might be seeing in the sand and why officials advise to leave them alone. That story, the week in politics, and a whole lot more on the next edition of the Texas Standard. Our producers and reporters include Sarah Ash, Shelley Brisbane, Michael Mark, Sean Saldana, Raul Alonso is our digital producer, Leah Scarpelli is our director, Casey Cheeks our technical director. They switched roles on this Thursday. Friday's almost here. Hope you can join us then when it's Texas Standard Time.
Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare, the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Wooldridge, Adrian Killam, the George Huntington Family, and the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation.